Episode 63, Father and Son. At one shout from Luigi, he, Cobalt, and the others sprang as one.
"We can't beat him if we just come at him like a normal foe,"
Luigi shouted, trying to stay calm despite how frightened he was.
"Treat him with as much caution as you can." "Right on it, Big L,"
Cobalt cried, dashing towards Antonio.
"I'll deal with him, just the way you taught me."
He sprang up into the air with a jumping technique that made Luigi smile with pride, going into a ground pound with the intent to pound on Antonio's head as Peasley dashed towards the Grand Star with his rapier. Antonio casually stepped out of the way before swinging his leg around in a kick that caught Cobalt in the back before he even touched the knock, sending the Yoshi flying into the air to crash against Strike, who had been preparing a fireball attack. Luigi wove lightning through the air, summoning his lightning hammer as he ran behind Peasley. The beanish rapier met Antonio's flaming claw as Antonio effortlessly disarmed Peasley with a flick before slashing at his chest with his other blade, causing him to go flying back. Putting his whole arm into the swing, Luigi brought his hammer down onto Antonio, who effortlessly parried the attack and sliced through the hammer's energized hammer, causing the weapon to disappear.
"I won't let this get to me. I'm not even warmed up yet."
Lightning flew around Luigi's fist as he swung it at Antonio, who grabbed him by the arm and twisted, throwing Luigi to the ground. Luigi grunted as his back hit the Comet Observatory's hard ground, but he was up as soon as he could to bring his fist flying towards Antonio's calm, statue-like face. The Grand Star moved with such speed, he might as well be teleported. A second before Luigi's first connected with Antonio, the Grand Star was behind him, striking him hard in the back, and as Luigi spun around to counter, Antonio was behind him again, kicking him into the air with his heavy boot before delivering a heavy slash with both blades that sent Luigi flying back, feeling as if he had been sliced by a weapon made by nothing less hot than the core of a star. As Luigi tried to rise to his feet, he saw Strike launch a fireball Antonio's way, only for Antonio to deflect it with one of his blades without even bothering to look in Strike's direction. King K. Rool leapt into the air, meaning to crush Antonio with a flying slam, but Antonio, seemingly aware of everything going on around him, grabbed the falling Kremling by the snout and bashed him to the ground, spinning around and kicking Cobalt, who had been sneaking up behind him, before pointing his blade at Strike, who had already launched a glowing orange beam of fire. As the fire met Antonio's blade, it parted as if cleaved by the glowing knife, both halves of the beam passing by harmlessly.
"As you see, the differences in our power is substantial,"
Antonio said, as if they were insolent students in need of a lecture.
"I have studied every fighting style of every nation practiced throughout every period of history. I know the techniques of the ancients of the Mushroom Kingdom, the fighting style of Cooper Azeroth, the first Koopa King. I know the personal forms of all the 4 heroes who faced the Shadow Queen, and lost and forbidden techniques developed by the extra-dimensional mages we know as the Tribe of Darkness. I know the different martial arts every culture of Shroob practiced before their pathetic planet collapsed, fighting styles of long-dead nations that have faded away from the memory of all but the most learned, revolutionary new techniques that have never before seen the light of day. I know magic that was created by radical wizards who thought they could slay gods. Against all that, what have you, my insolent son? Are you going to cry for your brother to help you? He should be standing here at my side. My beautiful Red Star. Don't let him get to you,"
Luigi shouted, rising to his feet.
"You haven't lost yet." "You bet,"
Cobalt cried.
"Hey there, Grand Star. Watch this."
Cobalt leapt over Antonio, flutter jumping as he called,
"Peasley! Your sword!" "As you wish, Cobalt!"
Peasley exclaimed, throwing the sword like a javelin towards the Yoshi. Cobalt smirked and stuck out his tongue, twining it around the hilt as Antonio advanced and swinging it around so the blade moved with enough momentum it might as well have been a rocket. The unorthodox attack surprised and impressed Luigi. But Antonio did not appear to be fazed at all. He grabbed Cobal's tongue in his hand a second before the point touched him, and without even blinking, pulled on it and flung Cobal back.
I can't hold back on this one,
Luigi thought, beginning to build up power in his fist so the air glowed blue around him. There was a boom as K. Rool launched strike right out of his huge blunderbuss. Flying through the air, the Fire Bro launched an entire bombing raid on Antonio from his hands, firing out a storm of explosive fireballs towards the Grand Star, who moved his arms with so much speed his blades became blurs, deflecting every one. As strike landed, he launched a huge fire blast at Antonio that seemed to shake the observatory. A huge fire blast that Antonio seemed to slice in half, staring at Strike with his cold, dead blue eyes. Antonio took a step forward, brushing past Strike and knocking him to the ground as if he was no more than a minor hindrance. As he was doing that, however, Luigi ran. Lightning trailed behind his hand as he leapt towards his father, swinging his fist towards him as electricity flickered around the Comet Observatory's main platform. This was the same amount of force as he had channeled when he had blown through a battleship with Mario. Normally he wouldn't use it on a living being, but... Antonio caught Luigi's wrist, violently twisting the hand before kneeing him hard in the chest, throwing him so he spun several times in the air, and finishing him with a solid kick that blasted him back more than 10 meters, launching him all the way across the observatory gardens to the edge of the metallic platform where Rosalina had repaired the star shroom, back in the old days.
As you can see, my son, you were dead the moment you rose a hand against me.
Mario and Bowser flew higher and higher up, the glowing light of the Dreamstone flowing behind them as they ascended higher and higher above the planet. Then, with lightning speed, Rosalina struck. Mario flew backwards, pulling at his new, seemingly endless reserves of magic power, moving at speeds he didn't even believe were possible. Bowser followed him as the world grew further and further away, as Mario moved at what he estimated to be faster than the speeder of light, streaking past stars and planets as they flew further and further into deep space. Rosalina swung her scythe at Mario, making a huge golden arc as Mario ducked, the glowing blade passing just inches above his head. As the three of them continued to fly through space at blinding speeds, Bowser came up behind her, raising up his fist enveloped in rainbow flame. Rosalina swung her arm back and jabbed the end of her staff at Bowser's chest, sending it flying back before twirling it around to counter a powerful blow from Mario's energy hammer which he had created out of the Dreamstone's light. The force of the collision sent Mario tumbling back, forcing him to gather his power and pre-form a flip through the air as Rosalina aimed a slice at him that would have seen him bisected. Mario righted himself, flying backwards as Rosalina pursued him through space, her strange, transparent-looking cape fluttering behind her. He flared a fireball in each hand, nervously realizing that each of them carried the same amount of energy as a full-force Mario finale. So this is what it felt like to wield omnipotent magical power. It was scary and exciting at the same time. Mario saw something like a glowing comet come up behind Rosalina. It was Bowser, spinning in his shell so fast he looked like a tornado of light, curving around Rosalina and leaving his shell to join Mario.
Don't think I'd leave you to have all the fun, Mario!
Bowser roared, his eyes glowing white with the Dreamstone's power.
Don't worry, Bowser!
Mario replied.
I won't abandon my #1 rival.
Bowser spat a massive glowing fireball which rocketed towards Rosalina, only to be slashed in two by a single swing of her scythe.
Even with this power, you cannot win,
she said coolly as she floated in space against a backdrop of stars and swirling nebulas.
Your efforts are irrelevant.
She raised her left hand and lasers streaked from her fingers, growing larger as they left her and zipping towards Mario and Bowser, so bright Mario could barely look at them without squinting. He summoned his hammer again, but before he could even lift it, the laser had struck him in the chest, sending him tumbling away through space. The laser burned at Mario's skin, but it was a kind of burn that felt cold, rather than hot, and pain shot through his entire body. Mario tried to regain his balance, but another laser hit him, and then another, as countless golden lasers zigzagged through space, striking and slashing at him and Bowser and driving them back from Rosalina, who hovered surrounded by a heavenly glow as the lasers came from her like rays fro the sun.
Bowser!
Mario shouted.
We have to regroup.
Focusing power to his feet, he managed to rocket out of the way just in time, a laser streaking past where he had been just a moment ago.
Yeah, for once we're on the same page, Mario.
Bowser replied, launching himself away as a laser passed by only an inch from his cheek. The two flew, as a chaotic tangle of zigzagging golden lasers launched itself after them, hundreds of streaks of light in hot pursuit. Some rocky, barren worlds scoured with craters loomed up in front of them, and they flew close to the surface, fast enough to kick up a massive cloud of dust which shone like a cloud of gold as the lasers streaked through it towards Mario and Bowser. As Mario and Bowser flew over the rocky world, the lasers pursued them, blasting their way through tall stony mountains and causing cliffs to crumble as they strained to catch up to the two brilliantly shining figures. Mario spun around, fireballs flaring up in his hand.
Okay, Bowser. Let's say put an end to this. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Bowser replied as both of them unleashed a massive storm of fireballs. Hundreds of glowing balls of magical light streaked towards Rosalina's golden light, meeting the powerful cosmic blasts and detonating with huge multicolored explosions that shaved the tops off any mountains unfortunate enough to be in their blast radius.
Oh yeah!
Mario shouted. Until he saw Rosalina flying towards them surrounded in a halo of golden light, her hair flying behind her as she swung her staff.
Bowser!
Mario shouted as a huge wave of starlight flew at them.
Gee! Get low!
Mario launched himself with the force of a cannon down towards the surface of the planet, Bowser flying beside him, as the sparkling wave flew overhead, cleaving the tops of entire mountains off and causing them to tumble to the ground, shaking the entire planet. Rosalina hovered high above them, surrounded in glowing light and looking every inch a star goddess.
You would stand in the way of the universe's salvation,
she said, her low, cold voice echoing across the barren plains.
This is his end, Mario and Bowser.
She twirled her staff faster and faster, hurling huge slashing waves of energy that rose in the air taller than the mountains themselves, huge blades of light that cleaved through the ground towards them, slicing plains into valleys and cutting mountains in two.
I had no idea she was this powerful.
Mario thought in awe as the golden light shone into his face, the entire planet collapsing and imploding into itself, entire mountain ranges crumbling as Rosalina's light blades sliced through them, each one converging onto a singe point. Them.
Hey!
Bowser yelled.
Are we going to sit here and die admiring her attack, or are we going to live, for Princess Peach's sake?
He grabbed Mario and launched himself high into the air, clutching him close to his chest as Bowser rolled through the air, a massive blade slicing past them and filling the air with light. Launching himself through space once again, Bowser left the nameless, rocky world as golden cracks crisscrossed their way down the surface and the barren planet fell apart. Antonio advanced towards Luigi, his blades glowing as if they were metal fresh from the forge, as Cobal, K. Rool, Strike, and Peasley circled him.
I am not in the habit of toying with my enemies.
Antonio said calmly.
I will finish you quickly and then watch this age die from the comfort of this observatory. Yeah, not if I have anything to say about it.
Cobal shouted.
Strike. On it.
The fire bro said coolly, extended a sword made of flickering flame from his hand and hurling it like a spinning boomerang towards Antonio, who calmly knocked it out of the way with a single swing of his blade. As he was doing that, Strike launched a storm of fireballs towards Cobal, who caught them in his mouth and unleashed a huge blast at fire towards Antonio, who quickly locked his blades together and pushed against the flame, shielding himself from it. Luigi dashed forward, channeling lightning through his entire body and launching it towards his father, who leaned back and let the lightning pass over his head as he swept his leg around him, kicking Prince Peasley back before leaping into a backflip, passing over the cannonball K-Rool had just launched from his blunderbuss and landing behind the Kremlin king, delivering a powerful cut to his back that sent him flying through the air.
We're letting him overwhelm us.
Luigi thought frantically as Strike launched fire at Peasley's rapier, coating it in flames as Peasley ran forward, his sword red-hot and looking as it was made of pure light. Antonio calmly sidestepped Peasley's flaming stab and grabbed the Beanish prince by the collar.
And so, the first of them falls,
he said, pulling his arm back and preparing to drive his blade deep into Peasley's heart.
Peasley!
Cobal shouted, dashing forward.
He'll die. Both of them will if I don't do something.
Luigi thought frantically, dashing towards Cobal as lightning danced around his fists. As Cobal leapt towards Antonio, Luigi leapt onto Cobal's back and unleashed a torrent of lightning at his father, who was forced to drop Peasley to block the storm with his blades. Luigi sprang from Cobal's back, his remaining energy forming into a hammer as he fell towards his father, pulling his arms back as he prepared to smash him with his full strength. Antonio stretched his arm upwards and fired a spear of pure light out of the palm of his hand, which hit Luigi's hammer and incinerated it in a second, before burning a hole through the observatory roof and continuing on into the sky. The spear of light exploded, filling the entire sky with fire as the force of the shockwave shook the observatory and the flash blinded Luigi's eyes as he fell next to Antonio, trying to punch him only for Antonio to catch his fist in his hand and hurl him to the side. Cobal came at the Grand Star with his fists, trying to use all the moves Luigi had taught him, only for Antonio to block every one, reading Cobal's techniques as if he had memorized them years in advance, before finishing him with a sickening uppercut.
Who are you, in the grand scheme of things?
Antonio spoke, gazing at each of them in turn.
For over 50 years, I have shaped the course of history and bent the world to my whims. You arrogant children, thinking you have the right to decide who wins or loses. Your fates were decided by me the day you were born.
He flourished his trench coat, as thousands of tiny threads of light launched from it, streaking around the Comet Observatory and cutting at Luigi. There were so many of them that whenever Luigi dodged he simply ended up falling into another, and they cut and burned him as if each one was a blade of fire coming at him at supersonic speeds. Luigi was battered around, scorched and sliced and thrown on the ground as Antonio controlled the threads with subtle movements of his hand, making them dance this way and that, weaving around his enemies and cutting off their every chance of escape. Luigi leapt towards Antonio, focusing lightning in his fist, only for two threats to rise up in front of him. Luigi crashed into them thin beams of light and cried out as he slid to the ground, the six more twisting around the observatory to stab at him with pain that felt as if white-hot fire had replaced all of the blood in his body. Cobal lay on the ground, in more pain than he had ever felt before, pain so great he could scarcely imagine it. He saw Strike off to his right, Peasley to his left, and he couldn't even see Luigi and K-Rool. He had been in so many fights now, so people might even consider him a veteran fight. Cobal had been kind of thinking of himself in that way for a bit too, telling himself that he was a pro now that he had fought one of the Koopalings, plus the Silver Star, and survived. But this... Now, for the first time, Cobal really understood what a true master of combat was, even more than when he had trained with Luigi. How could they possibly defeat an enemy who so massively outmatched even the Mario brothers, the most powerful heroes the world had ever known? He couldn't give up. He had come too far for this. What Antonio was planning? It would destroy the entire world. It would kill his father, who he had finally found after 18 long years of being an orphan. He had to. But he couldn't. Antonio strode towards him, the Grand Star's shiny black boots seeming to echo on the Comet Observatory's floor as they vanished, orange dust falling around Antonio like embers.
"I will eliminate you, one by one,"
he said coolly.
"Then, perhaps before he breathes his last, my son will truly comprehend what my plan means."
The long shadow of the Grand Star fell over Cobal. Antonio raised his hand and a long spear of orange light appeared, hovering slightly above his outstretched palm.
"Goodbye, product of the arrogance of my son."
Death. Cobal had rarely thought about it. He had always thought he'd have so much longer to live. Antonio let the spear fly.
Gak.
K. Rool gulped. Cobal gasped as blood dripped onto the ground beside him. He took off his glasses to stare at the massive Kremling who was shielding him with his huge body. A hole wider than Cobal's fist was punched clean through his body. Cobal glanced behind him to see Antonio's spear explode on the horizon, a humongous ball of flame which shook the observatory with its shockwaves and seemed to be large enough to swallow up all of Toad Town in its blinding light.
"Why? You know?"
K. Rool gasped.
"If I hadn't met you, kid, I'd probably still be drowning my sorrows in that tavern back on Isle Delfino. I may be a good many years past my prime. But you helped me to remember what it felt like to be the tyrant of Donkey Kong Island again, wreaking havoc in my ship and causing mayhem with a smile on my face."
K. Rool grinned, barely his teeth, as he closed his eyes.
"Ha! The stupid old ape Donkey Kong managing to outlive me. Who would have imagined that?"
K. Rool fell, and his fall seemed to shake the very ground that Cobal stood on. The planet loomed up in front of Mario and Bowser, a huge icy world surrounded by rings.
"There!"
Mario exclaimed, pointing to it as Bowser let go of him.
"That will give us the advantage. Let's go." "You make the plans, chump,"
Bowser grunted.
"I'm not used to fighting an enemy who can cut a freaking mountain in half."
Mario blasted himself towards the rings, knowing Rosalina would be close behind. He had never been a pessimist, but even he was having trouble thinking of a way he could get out of this one. Even the Shadow Queen had never been at full strength, and when he had faced down Dimentio in the depths of the void when the evil jester had absorbed the Chaos Heart, Dimentio had not been able to use the all-powerful destructive magic to its fullest extent despite all of his magical genius. But here Rosalina was, wielding the full might of her cosmic energy with disregard. Mario knew he had half of the Dream Stone within in him. He was more powerful than he had ever been, but unlike Rosalina, he certainly wasn't used to it. Still, he had to keep on fighting. Everyone in the Mushroom World, Luigi, Peach, all the friends he had made in all his many adventures, they were all counting on him. As Mario and Bowser flew into the rings, past the chunks of stone and ice that made them up, Rosalina approached, her scythe glowing as if it were an entire star compressed into the shape of a weapon, and as she slashed with it, Thousands of huge asteroids were sliced in half as Mario and Bowser only just avoided the massive attack that would have decided the battle in a single stroke.
"Rosalina, I'm not going to be holding back with this one!"
he exclaimed, unleashing a storm of huge fireballs from his hands with machine gun-like speed, while Bowser followed suit, two huge glowing clouds of fireballs making their way towards Rosalina. Rosalina closed her eyes and spun her scythe at blinding speed in front of her, and as each fireball hit it, it dissipated harmlessly.
"Well, if that won't work, how about you trying blocking this?"
Bowser roared, sucking in air and roaring. An enormous beam of purple fire launched from his mouth, the widest beam of fire Mario had ever seen. It swallowed up the asteroids in its path and seemed to dye the very blackness of space a bright violet as it made its way to Rosalina, dwarfing her, one woman against a humongous blast of enchanted fire. With a flash of blue light, Rosalina teleported behind Bowser, leaving the blast to fly harmlessly into space, and kicked Bowser once in the shell, causing to cry out and gasp for breath. Rosalina spun her scythe around once, striking Bowser with it and sending him flying, crashing through asteroids until he finally came to a rest on one larger one, smashing a crater deep into it.
"Bowser!"
Mario shouted as he built up fire in his hands and threw his arms back, preparing his Mario finale, only for Rosalina to teleport behind him and strike him in the head with the bottom of her scythe, knocking him back. Mario felt pain flash through his head and he struggled to keep concise. Rosalina was twirling her weapon in her hand, spinning it towards him like a sparkling golden saw, and Mario had to force his power up to summon his hammer. He barely managed to deflect her spinning blade, and immediately felt Rosalina's shoe hit him hard in the chest, knocking him back with force that dwarfed a bullet bill blast. Mario went flying and slammed into the same asteroid Bowser had hit. The mortal enemies lay there, the huge blue and white globe behind them as Mario felt the touch of the cold stone on his neck, millions of light years away from the mushroom world. Rosalina hovered before them, raising her arms.
"You have failed,"
she pronounced, as a blinding wave of stellar energy emitted from her, vaporizing the asteroids and hitting Mario with the force of a million thwomps. With a cry, he and Bowser were launched away from the rings, down into the atmosphere of the icy planet, as Rosalina hung in the air, a faint silhouette surrounded by a sun-like glow.
"I still want to fail you, Peach."
"No!" Luigi heard Cobal scream, as the blue Yoshi leapt towards Antonio. The Grand Star bent downwards, as Cobal leapt over him, and as Cobal's tail passed over Antonio's head, Antonio grabbed it and hurled Cobal through the air, in the same motion hurling a light spear straight towards his heart.
"Cobal!"
Luigi shouted, forcing himself to leap to his feet and fire a humongous sapphire blast of lightning which bathed the observatory in its glow, a blast that moved as fast as a bullet and with the power of 20 king bills. It hit Antonio's light spear just before it struck Cobal and exploded, turning the attack trajectory slightly so that it missed Cobal by a hair. Strike summoned two fire swords and leapt to slash at Antonio from behind, but Antonio grabbed his arm with his left hand, ducking under Peasley's stab and slashing at his chest with his right. Peasley gasped in pain, before Antonio kicked him in the head, sending him flying. Antonio hurled Strike to the ground, causing the Koopa to bounce across the ground, and immediately sent two light spears roaring towards the fallen fighters. Luigi threw himself in front of them and slammed his fists into the ground, creating two huge pillars of electric energy that exploded from the ground and struck the spears, deflecting them so they flew harmlessly into the air. Cobal picked up K-Rool's blunderbuss and launched a cannonball right at the Grand Star's chest before swallowing the gun and transforming it into an egg. Antonio coolly sliced the cannonball in half with his wrist blade as Cobal ran towards him, launching a light spear towards him. Cobal smirked coldly and leapt over the spear, chucking his egg at Antonio's face. Antonio casually deflected it, and Luigi leapt up behind him, raising his lightning hammer high. Antonio grabbed them both by their necks as soon as they got within a foot of him and bashed their heads together. Luigi saw his vision get fuzzy as fireworks exploded in his head and he dropped to his knees.
"I won't let you put an end to this world,"
Luigi heard Strike say coolly, and felt heat rush up him as the fire bro launched a massive fireball Antonio's way. Antonio leapt over it, and Luigi saw his chance. Forcing himself to his feet, he unleashed a titanic blast of lightning right towards his father, who spun around still in mid-jump to cross his blades, shielding himself from the blast as electricity danced around him. It could not stop the attack's momentum, however, and the attack blasted Antonio through the observatory's roof.
"He's mine!"
Cobal exclaimed, Flutter jumping after him, seemingly forgetting about all of his injuries.
He's going to get himself killed,"
Luigi thought in horror. He took a look at K-Rool's body, lying draped on the observatory floor. He'd brought Cobal into his train, told him to carry on his legacy of protecting the mushroom world. He couldn't let anything happen to him. Tensing his legs and he leapt into a super jump, Luigi flew through the hole and onto the Comet Observatory's roof. The starry skies surrounded them, a perfect canvas of all the beauty in the universe, as the entire city and the battling fleets were spread out to the horizon below them. Cobal and Antonio were fighting, as the observatory's spire rose up from behind them. Cobal was fighting well, better than he had expected. But Antonio seemed to be 10 steps ahead of him, every single movement having a purpose, as he flowed into one martial art form and then into the next, obliterating Cobal with punches and kicks and cutting burning slashes on his chest with his blades. Cobal and Strike leapt up onto the roof somewhere behind Luigi and ran for Cobal, but Antonio swept his trenchcoat towards them, launching hundreds of string-like lasers towards them which struck them from every direction, knocking them back down. Antonio kicked Cobal in the chest, knocking him back, and raised his right blade, elongating it into a full-length glowing sword protruding from his wrist. Cobal, getting up on his 2 feet, had enough sense to jump even though he was out of Antonio's reach. The slash of his blade produced some kind of energized cut that sliced clean through the entire spire. It shook before falling with a groan, sliding off the roof and tumbling down the long, long way to the city. Cobal's eyes widened and he quickly leapt up onto the now flat platform on the top of the roof where the spire had stood just a moment ago, now a perfectly flat smooth surface. He stared at Antonio deviantly, as the Grand Star leapt up and brutally punched Cobal in the gut. The blue Yoshi dropped to his knees and stood there, looking at Antonio as wind blew around the Grand Star and the light of a billion stars cast their heavenly glows down upon him. As Luigi gazed up at the surreal sight, he knew he was about to witness Cobal's execution. The boy who had trained, built from an untrained rebel into a true hero, was about to die. Antonio's sword shrunk back down into a smaller-sized wrist blade. He brought his arm back, preparing to drive the fiery knife deep into Cobal's heart. Then Luigi, condensing so much power into his fist that it ached, punched the roof with all his might. The canopy of the Comet Observatory exploded into blue light, flinging Antonio and Cobal off the top of the roof and scattering debris across the sky. A chunk of stone hit Cobal, knocking him back down to the observatory, but Antonio continued to fall. He twisted in the air, as if to make some move, but with the last reserves of his power, Luigi sent a storm of lightning towards him, forcing Antonio to block it with his blades. As he fell, his trenchcoat flapping around him. The remainder of the roof shook and began to collapse and Luigi leapt off and ran to the edge of the observatory, watching the orange figure of his father fall further and further. In a normal battle, something like this could be a decisive blow, but in this fight, Luigi took off his cap and whipped sweat off his brow, panting from exhaustion. This fight was far from over. And yet, he had given it his still didn't even appear to be trying, as if they were still children who warranted going easy on.
Everyone, please, give it your all. The mushroom world depends on it. If we don't stop this guy soon, everything we've ever worked for will fall apart.